Welcome to the Potion Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Have you got a busy week this week with Tails and everything?
Yeah, I mean, not as much with Tails, but it's a busy week every week.
Well, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a good thing. I have a lot going on currently.
So what
How
have
are
you
you?
got? I'm good. Same thing. Busy every week. It feels like I was busy before COVID, and then
Yeah.
during COVID, I was like proactive and started new things. And then
Yeah.
COVID we started rolling out of COVID in BC, and now it's like now I'm double busy as I was before COVID because all the stuff I started during COVID, I'm still have
Exactly.
to do.
Yeah, that I am kind of in the same boat. I said yes to all of the things during the shutdown because I was like, oh no, the bars are closed. We're not going to be able to pay ourselves to the bars. So yes, I will do this. And yes, I'm going to do that. And I just said yes to everything. And now I have so many things going on. Yeah.
I started a new company, which has actually done really, really well. So now it's like, awesome. Now that's kicking off. And then I took back over my old bar, Clive's. So I took back over Clive's with COVID reopening. So that's been a little hectic as well. But we're sort of in the same boat as, well, everywhere really. Like we just got our hours pulled back to 10 p.m.
Oh God.
Have inside dining, but there's a whole bunch of rules and lots of perspex, and I'm curious to see how many Medium articles are going to come out after COVID's over about plastic wastage and all the bars that rip out all the bars that rip out all the perspex siding in their bars and just throw it in the trash because it's just you can't get perspex right now. So but so I usually kick off the podcast with like the origin story. I always like the origin story because I think I have a very weird demographic when it comes to the post shift. I have very young bartenders and then people in our age bracket that are like owners and operators. All the bartenders in the middle, that 24 to 32-year-old age group, they already know everything, so they don't need to listen to my podcast. But I get a lot of young bartenders and then operators as well. So I have a big myriad. And so I want to start off with a story, though. Do you remember the first time we met?
I can't say that I do.
It was 2009 BNIC or 2010.
Don't say we met at Tails.
No, it was the Cognac Summit. It was the Cognac Summit
right.
in Cognac, and
oh my gosh,
I was 29 years old, and I got invited to this thing. I have no idea how I got the invite for it, and I landed, and I'm standing in a room with yourself, Sasha Petresky, Salvatore Calabrese, Peter DeRe. That was like a momentous year. And I'm like, I'm an Australian bartender that lives in Victoria, BC, a city of like 180,000 people. What the hell am I doing inside this room? And I was hanging out with Jeffrey because Jeffrey and I caught the same flight, Morgenthaler, and he felt the same way. I'm like, how in the hell did I like roll the dice on this as an event to go to with all these amazing people? And I still fanboy out pretty hard. I was actually nervous this morning to talk to you because I fanboy out pretty hard on what you do.
It's so funny. I was talking to Eric Alperin, I want to say like last week or the week before, and he was on that trip too, and we were talking about how it was such a weird, it was kind of a weird thing, it was like they asked us to come do that, and then they locked us in that room all day long, and they didn't actually let us see any of Cognac, and then like they wanted us to make drinks with the Cognac and teach other people how to make drinks with the Cognac who were less experienced at our table, and then it was just bizarre. And then at night they would put us on buses and take us to see the different Cognac houses, but you couldn't actually see anything because it was like pitch black out. I just remember that being Toby Cicchini was on that trip. It was like a who's who of the bar world that was there. But and then there was like a weird one of the things that they took us to was like a fake like speakeasy thing where they had
Yes.
like
And
they pretended. It was so strange, and all of a sudden like people came in with guns like telling us to vacate because it's illegal to be drinking. It was so, and I remember I laughed. Sasha and I were at like a fake roulette table or something, and the two of us just started cracking up because we were just like, this is so strange. But it was at the height of the like, you know,
yes.
speakeasy, everything's a speakeasy, and you know, what Sasha was doing at Milk and Honey, and you know, and Flatiron Lounge, people would refer to it as a speakeasy, but I'm like, it's a high volume cocktail bar that's just a 1920s Art Deco decor. Anyway, that was a funny trip.
It was a hilarious trip. And the cocktails were just horrible. And I remember just going, can we just drink straight cognac? Can you just give us that? And I remember I went out and I think I was smoking a cigar because they had cigars and everything as well. So I was smoking a cigar with Toby. He signed my book of Cosmopolitan. And then we came back in the bar and it was literally Salvatore and Dorelli just sitting there with everybody around them and then just telling stories. And it was just like, I'm in heaven right now.
Oh my God, those two are like, they're such a rip together.
Oh yeah. When they get together, it like amplifies everything up to 20.
Oh yeah. Very fun.
So for everybody, I highly doubt anybody who's listening to my podcast right now will even not know who you are. How did you get into the game? Like, were you always planning to be a bartender? Were you like third generation bartender, or did you sort of fall into it and just fall in love with it?
Yeah, I know I'm not a second generation bartender, although, you know, cocktails and drinking were definitely a big part of my mom's side of the family. My grandparents always had cocktail hour and drank martinis and, you know, Manhattans and actually made cocktails. So I experienced that as a kid. And then I grew up in Hawaii. So my parents did a lot of entertaining, and our house was sort of like this revolving door of guests, right? Because when you live in Hawaii, everybody wants to come visit you. And so, you know, my mom, actually, her car was like a limousine van because so many people would come, and then we could all hop in this thing and we would take people around the island and go to the beaches and do all this stuff. So I was definitely, you know, my mom's sort of assistant with hospitality in the house as a kid. I had a mango tree in the backyard and a lychee tree in the front yard. And we would, you know, my mom would always have like blended margaritas, and I would pass a tray of poo-poos, as they call them in Hawaii, you know. And so that was sort of, it happened very young. And then, you know, some of my first jobs were in hospitality, and I got a job as a cocktail waitress in Waikiki when I was 18. So that was sort of like the beginning of it, where I was like, oh, there's something to be said about this, you know, and I was always intrigued with what was happening behind the bar. But I was never able to actually be a bartender. I mean, I was super young when I started doing that. And then I left and went to college. I went to Florida State University, and I got my first bartending job there at a place called The Pub, which was like this, you know, beer and a shot kind of place. Actually, there's a very funny photo. Oh, I don't have it over there now, but of me like behind the bar, you know, with the backwards hat and like my, you know, shirt tied in a knot. But that was like my very first bartending job. And I graduated from college and had been waitressing, bartending, cocktail serving, all up until that point. And when I moved to San Francisco to get a real job, because my dad was like, when are you going to get a real job? You know, people still asked you that at that time. And I was just like bored to tears. I was doing marketing for my aunt's company, and I was like, this is so not me. I love the action of the hospitality industry and the restaurant and bar business. I like that I never know what's going to happen or who's going to come in. And, you know, I was very much drawn to it, and I missed it, you know, immediately, because I had been doing it from 18 to like 25, 24. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to go back to that. So I decided I just started bartending and cocktail serving again in San Francisco, because I didn't really know what else to do with myself. So that's sort of like the short of it. But then or the long story, but when I moved to New York, I started managing a little bar in the West Village. And that was kind of where this side of my career really took off.
What year was that?
That was 97.
So that was sort of like I think I talk to a lot of young bartenders these days, and cocktail culture has been around for a long, but there was a big gap between the Jerry Thomas, Harry Johnson, pre-prohibition era style stuff, and like the quality of cocktails that we have now. Really,
Yeah.
we're talking about almost 30 years now, but like 25, 30 years, which isn't really a long time for how explosive it has been. And especially,
Exactly.
obviously, 1997, there was no internet. That's when I started in the industry as well. Like, there was no internet, so you had no smartphone. If someone
No.
ordered a random cocktail at the bar, you sure as hell better have like 4 or 5 books behind that bar that are all sticky and gross that you could try and
Yeah.
flip through randomly to try and find this random recipe.
Yeah. So
How was
that's kind of where like that's how we make it here came about. Oh, you want a Satan's Fizz? This is how we make it.
That'd be a great name for a bar, actually. This is how we make it here.
Yeah.
So how was cocktail culture and because New York was obviously a hotbed in that era, how was cocktail culture sort of popping off for you and in the full culture of New York?
Well, when I first got here, it was interesting because in San Francisco, I was there between 94 and 97, and fresh juice was kind of the norm in San Francisco. There were a few places that had like a menu, but mostly it was just people like going in saying, I'll have a margarita or a Cosmo or a lemon drop or whatever, the cocktails were. And there were a few places that had actual menus, but mostly like classic cocktails that they had found, and they made a little list. When I got to New York, nobody was using fresh juice at all. It was like sour mix on the gun. Chefs were not very supportive of the bar and bartenders, and they were sort of just like, whatever. It's just, people, they'll drink beer and wine, and sour mix on the gun is fine.
Yeah.
So, there were a handful of us, obviously Dale was at the Rainbow Room and he started doing cocktail menus, and was using fresh juices and making syrups and all of those things. But other than Dale, it was like slim pickings trying to find a quality drink in Manhattan. So when I started managing C3 Lounge in the West Village, I started talking to the chef because I was like, can we use fresh juice? Can we do all these things? Because I was doing that in San Francisco. I didn't really realize at the time, that there really weren't very many people at all doing that. I was kind of just trying to put the best thing I could in a glass for the people that came into this little bar, because it was kind of like a one-woman show. I would bartend and cocktail this room. It was a small space, and I would come out and I would go to all the tables. And so, I started taking a more culinary approach to cocktails at that place. And the people who cared about cocktails, including Dale, heard about what I was doing and sort of found me there. And then I was like, oh, other people care about this. I really had no idea.
Do you find that all that passion, like, I think it still happens regularly, even in this modern age, like all that passion, you need to have a hell of a lot of patience to sort of like every person that comes in is like, okay, well, this is the way it is because we're doing fresh juice and we're doing this and it's a real good cocktail and that sort of stuff. Did you find that patience was a thing that you had already ingrained, that you knew the goal you wanted, but you sort of had to figure out the time it was going to take to get to that goal before everybody sort of jumped the shark and sort of like, oh, this is how cocktails are supposed to be?
I don't think not really. I didn't have that much foresight. I think more than anything, I was like, I loved this little bar and I was like, I'm going to make, it was more for me about making the owner happy and filling it with people and, getting people to come back and see me. I didn't have my vision was not that wide at that time. I was in my 20s and I was just like, somebody was like, oh, I went to LA and I had an apple martini. And I was like, ooh, an apple martini. How would I make an apple martini? But I had never tried apple pucker, so I was like, I took apples and I infused them in vodka and I made this like apple martini that was like biting into an apple with a kick, because I wanted it to be natural tasting. Right. But I was not very educated on what the hell was going on outside of my little space. I was just trying to give people, the best thing I possibly could in a glass. And with that particular cocktail, like somebody from the New York Times came in and had it and then wrote a whole piece in the New York Times about it. And that was like, overnight, I was cocktail expert Julie Reiner, and I was like, uh-oh, I better read everything I possibly can.
So with that turning point, what doors opened after that sort of thing happened?
Well, it was more so, it was like people started coming in, so Dale came in and Tony Abughanum came in and they were like, what are you doing in here? And I was like, oh, there's other people, and then Dale sent me on a celebrity bartender like thing with Audrey Saunders, and the two of us met like outside of this bar. And then we were like, oh, you care, but you like cocktails too. And so then she started coming in and I was like, look at my infusion, I mean, it was, so this small community sort of started to develop and we kind of found one another. And I met Sasha, and Ted Hay randomly was like filming a movie and staying in the West Village, and he would come in and sit at my bar. And it was so funny. Like, I didn't know who he was, later he would write, he was a cocktail historian as well and would write some incredible books, but he would come in every night while filming Riding in Cars with Boys, which was like a Drew Barrymore movie. Yeah. And he was the one who was the guy to say like, that table is from 1955 and not, you need it to be from 1960, but he would sit at my bar and he would point at all of these random bottles on the back bar and be like, make me a drink with that. And there was mezcal and there were a lot of bottles that I had never tried before. The owner just had a really eclectic collection of booze on this back bar, and so I was making cocktails with him with eau de vie, and so he really sort of like pushed me to try new things and kind of grab for bottles that I didn't know anything about, and there was nobody to really teach me about either, so I was sort of just flying by the seat of my pants. But it, to answer your question, it sort of opened up this community and then also, gave me opportunities. The bad side of it was that after that New York Times article, I was in New York Magazine, and then it just became like this snowball effect of press, which I thought was great, and I thought that the woman who owned the place was going to be really excited about. But ultimately, the chef and the restaurant manager, you had to walk through the restaurant to get to the bar, which was in the back. So the restaurant became like a walkway for all of the people coming to see me in the bar. And I was making a lot of money in the bar, and they were not happy about that. And so they went to the owner and told her that I was going to open my own place and steal all of her clientele.
Oh.
And I got fired.
Oh, was that firing the catalyst for you opening your own place, or did you pop about a little bit more before really knuckling down to your own venue?
Before that happened, I was absolutely like, I'm going to open my own bar because, clearly this is an untapped market in a city where everything's been done, right? Mm-hmm. I was like, New York City, New Yorkers want the best of everything and they're willing to travel for it. And so I was all about, I was like, I'm going to open a place that just focuses on high quality cocktails, because there really wasn't any, at the time. It was, Sasha's place, which was hard to find, Milk and Honey. It was tiny. There were only a couple spots that you could really get a high quality cocktail. The Rainbow Room is expensive and hard to get into. So I wanted to open something that was more accessible to people and, that anybody could kind of come into, but that you could get a really great high quality drink. But yeah, I got fired for doing too good of a job, which only gave me more fire to open my own place. Like, I'll show you.
How long? Because Clover Club was your first spot, right? I'm correct in that.
Nope, Flatiron
Oh,
Lounge.
Flatiron, of course.
Yeah, in 2003.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
When after C3 did you open Flatiron?
Um, Flatiron, we opened in 2003. I think I got fired from C3. I can't remember the exact. Just before September 11th because
Uh,
I also it was like 4 months before September 11th because I had just moved downtown to Lower Manhattan. And then I got fired and then I was homeless. So it was like a series of unfortunate events.
so when you opened Flatiron, so is Flatiron 17 years old?
Flatiron, we closed a year ago. It was just over a year ago. But yeah, it would be.
Wow.
We ended up, the landlord wanted $33,000 a month in rent
That's
for
obscene.
that space. It's obscene. Yeah. And we were just like, it's a cocktail bar. I think the rent when we opened was like $8,000 or something. And by the time we closed, we were already paying like 24 or something like that, which is also ridiculous. And at that point, there's no profit to be had. It was just a place that was giving people jobs and, you know, but it was unfortunate, but we were like, well, we can't keep it open, you know?
Do you feel in New York especially, I think it's everywhere in major cities, do you think in New York especially landlords see success, like social media success and articles and all this sort of stuff about cocktail bars and like, oh, you must be making way more money than you are. I'm going to put your rent up.
I don't even think it was that at all. It was just that that neighborhood, I mean, the Flatiron district just became a very expensive neighborhood. It was like when we opened on 19th Street, there was really like nothing there. There was a restaurant called La Cajou, like down the street. And that was it. We had security at the front door because it was a very dark block. Cut to like how many years later, there was like a Soul Cycle across the street and like Burger and Lobster, and there's like all of these restaurants and all of these shops, and it became some serious real estate. And the building was sold when we moved into that building. It was owned by the woman who lived upstairs, and then she sold the building to a management company who, they don't care about the businesses. All they care about is dollars, and you're not, they don't. There's no if there's no human interaction, there's no compassion for anything, and they don't care about the fabric of the city either. We've lost so many, even pre-COVID, we were already losing a bunch of really great bars and restaurants because of rent issues and rent control and the amount of money that they want for these spaces. A little like dive bar in Soho can't pay a Soho rent, and they were there before it was the shopping mecca that is Soho, right? So, it's just making Manhattan very vanilla.
How have you taken, like, going from that sort of passion driven, learning about the community at C3 and then going to Flatiron Open, and you've basically made Flatiron and Clover Club have been a crucible for like some amazing bartending talent that are now spread across the country. And a lot of people tout your mentorship as the reason that they've sort of spread their wings and gone everywhere and opened their own venues and that's the thing. What is your mentality and your philosophy behind that sort of drive and teach and taking bartenders under your wing and sort of elevating them up? Because I've always found it, well, it's not hard now, but like when I first started and I started having young bartenders come under me, because I didn't have mentors when I was growing up, like I had in Brisbane, Australia, the cocktail culture was still very young when I left. And really I had stacks and stacks of books that I'd not write notes into and stuff like that. But I never really had that sort of relationship where I could pass that sort of philosophy on to someone else. How did you sort of build this mentorship and philosophy behind the bartenders you've had? You've had Giuseppe Gonzalez and Ivy Mix and everybody. Like, how have you sort of built this philosophy of yourself without really having that one-on-one mentorship that most young bartenders have?
Yeah. I was very much like self-taught. I mean, thankfully, when I met Dale early on, he would invite me to work like events with him, and I would, be like, oh, that's how you cut a pineapple. Like I'd watch Dale and be like, okay, I'm going to do it like that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it was sort of like, I was learning right along with the bartenders that I hired at Flatiron. You know, I mean, Phil Ward, Katie Stipe, you know, Lynette Marrero, they were like some of the earliest staff that I had at Flatiron. And, you know, I was 30 when I opened it. So, you know, I was still figuring things out on my own, you know, with them. So I sort of brought them in, taught them what I knew, but then collectively we were like, oh, well, you know, I wonder what it would be, what it would happen if we use this. And so we sort of, it became like this kind of think tank, and, you know, we did all kind of learn from one another, and I gave them opportunities, but they had great ideas that we utilized as well. And I sort of realized, you know, very early on that it was much better to get the bartenders and the cocktail servers and the barbacks involved in the whole process, so that they took ownership of the program itself and what we were doing there. It was much more exciting for, you know, Katie Stipe to be behind the bar when she had a cocktail that was on the menu and she could say, hey, you should have a siesta, it's my drink, you know. And so, you know, that I got globbed onto that very early. And also, you know, I realized that as a business owner, turnover is very expensive. And so I wanted to give people opportunities to move up within our organization. So, you know, Phil Ward started as a barback busser, you know, and ended up becoming a bartender. And then I sent him on to Pegu, where he, you know, was one of the head bartenders there. Same with Katie, started as a cocktail server, as did Lynette, you know. So, you know, a lot of people came in different positions and just learned. But I was able to keep them for longer, you know, within our establishments by giving them the next job, you know. And then, you know, so they stayed and they learned, and then they went on and did other things when they sort of had exhausted themselves within our four walls, right? And that's always been really important to me. You know, I mean, Tom Macy, who's my partner at Clover Club and Leanda, he started same thing as a barback, became a bartender, became the head bartender. And then when we bought out our jerky partner at Clover Club, he bought in and became a partner. And then I recently just launched, you know, social hour cocktails with Tom. So, you know, I like to sort of, people who are talented, and I like to sort of give them what the next thing, so that I can enjoy their success with them, if that makes sense.
So what drives you? Well, what drove you at the time to have a successful venue with Flatiron to go, okay, I'm going to open up another cocktail bar and another cocktail bar? Like, I'm always
part of it
curious.
is being crazy.
Yeah, because I've been a part of since 2013. I've done 13 venues now since
Yeah.
2013, and
Wow, that's a lot.
it's I did 3 in Singapore last year, which I wouldn't
Wow.
3 in Singapore in 5 months, and I wouldn't suggest that for anybody. Simultaneous
Hmm.
openings in 3 different venues, no, never again.
Yep.
And it's some sort of psychosis, I think, that you sort of glaze over and you just turn into a robot and you do an opening, and then wake up and you're like, oh, that was painful. Your body's hurting, you're mentally stayed. It's just like, why did I do
Yeah.
that again? What pushed you to keep being better and getting better and opening new venues and nurturing these bartenders and sort of expanding your empire, basically?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it was certainly the energy of New York City. And, you know, there's definitely a work ethic and just an energy here that's kind of like, what are you doing to get ahead today? You know, and like in San Francisco, it was okay to sit in a coffee shop all day and like drink lattes, and you'd be like, I'm gonna work 3 shifts this week, you know. But New York City is like, it's, you know, it's fast paced. There are people, you know, vying for your job, and like it's sort of like, let's go. And I think that kind of got into me really early on. I was like, oh, I have to do all these things, you know. I just sort of, I couldn't stop, you know. But after opening Flatiron, you know, the partners came to me and they were like, oh, well, you know, we there's a space that we were looking at, and what do you think about doing another spot? And Audrey was up at the Carlisle, and we were talking to Audrey about, I went and talked to her because I felt like it was too early for me to put my name on another space. And so, we brought her in to sort of be the face of Pegu Club. And then we opened Pegu. And then, I moved to Brooklyn, and I was like, oh, how come there's no place to go? And, I was like, I basically, Clover Club was the place that I was looking for, that wasn't there, and so a lot of these things sort of just started out with a conversation with somebody. I talked to somebody I knew in real estate, and I was like, hey, I really like to open something in Brooklyn. Let me know if you see any commercial spaces that, you think would make a great bar. And then I had a conversation with David Wondrich, who lives, in Brooklyn, and was like, oh, what do you think? And he was like, oh, Smith Street would be great. And, selfishly, he said that he later told me that he wanted to be able to walk to this bar. So,
of course he did.
Yeah. But, so yeah, that was, I think that was a lot of it. And then, the opening after Clover Club, I kind of made a big mistake with the original partner there, in that I signed a 3-bar deal with him. Yeah, big dummy. The biggest mistake of my entire career, and not coming up with some sort of a plan for what if we open second bar and then we hate each other, and we don't want to work together anymore. What happens then? We forgot to put that in the notes. So we opened Lani Kai basically kind of because I was contracted to do the next bar, and I really wasn't ready to do the next bar, but I felt like I had to, so that was sort of how Lani Kai happened. And then Leanda sort of fell in our lap in a way that, our landlord owned the building across the street, and he came to us and was like, it was very like old school Brooklyn. He was like, I want you girls to take my space. Because it had been kind of a revolving door of failed restaurants, and Clover Club was successful, had been open for, I want to say 9 or 10 years, or maybe a few less at that point. And so, he just wanted to get somebody in there that he knew was going to succeed, and he wouldn't have to flip his space again, and at that time, Ivy was looking to open a place of her own. She was still bartending at Clover Club, but was hitting a lot of walls. And, we started talking to her, and that was sort of how Leanda happened. So that's sort of, each one was sort of a different reason, but yeah, you work your ass off when you live in New York City.
What do you think is the reason behind, like, especially in New York City, especially in modern hospitality, where the newest thing is always the coolest thing. Like, it's always about like I've had bars and restaurants that cocktail menus change every 6 weeks, which is a huge amount of work. But
yeah,
what do you think is the reason behind the longevity of Clover Club and Flatiron before it shut down? And especially in New York, what do you think the reason for the longevity is? Because bars, like, let's be really honest, in the modern cocktail world, the modern hospitality world, restaurants and bars aren't supposed to last a decade and a half. That's the nature of the beast. Like, eventually a rebrand happens and things change. But you've stuck to this sort of mission statement and mantra. Like, what is the driving force behind, and what do you think the reason is for the longevity?
Well, at Clover Club, I think that we created an incredible sort of neighborhood bar that has global recognition. A lot of our clientele and the people that come in there don't necessarily know about all of this. They don't necessarily, they're not coming there because Julie Reiner is behind this bar program. It's like they're coming there because the service is great. The cocktails are always delicious. The food is great. It's we have an awesome private party space, and they can have a 40th birthday back there. And, that is, we certainly do get a lot of recognition from the press and within the bar community. But again, the neighborhood really loves that we're there, and they support us, and they take a lot of pride that Clover Club is in that part of Brooklyn, you know? And so, you know, we really focus just on trying to put out a high quality product and being hospitable, and supplying the neighborhood with, you know, the place to be, you know, and that's ultimately the goal. You know, and even like during this COVID shutdown, it's been a, you know, it's been something that's really, you know, come close to home again, because the neighborhood and the people that live there are the ones that are keeping us open, you know, and they're all coming in and saying, how can we support you? We want to make sure that Clover Club, we love this place. And, you know, it's revered to them in their neighborhood, whether they're a part of the cocktail world or not. So, you know, I think that ultimately, that's why we last a long time, you know, and I think Flatiron was a very similar scenario.
Do you think a lot of young bartenders, when they start looking at opening their own place, get caught up in, I always call about the saturation point. Like I always say 10% of the market gets cocktail culture, the really nerdy ones, but there's like 90% of the market outside our little social media bubbles that
Right.
we get fed liquor.com all day. We get fed Punch and Thirsty and all these sort of things on our feed. So we think
Yep.
that we're like changing the world. But really
Yeah.
outside that, I always like it to go to a liquor store and just stand in a liquor store and watch what people buy, even in my little
Yep.
city, and just watch what people buy. I'm like, oh, nothing I've done for the last 10 years really made a real big dent in the way the market perceives cocktails and that sort of stuff. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but
Yeah.
how has, and I don't want to sort of go into a downer thing, but how has COVID, and I hate to say pivot, but how has New York bars and yourself sort of changed the way that you do things with COVID hitting? And do you think a lot of the mentality changes for the restaurant and bar industry are going to stay post-COVID if we ever go back to normal? I feel COVID has sort of brought out a lot of our vulnerabilities. And those
Mm-hmm.
vulnerabilities, I think, is something that the general public needs to see almost, because I feel like we put on a happy face. Like we can have a horrible meeting with our accountant and then service starts and you're going to be like, did, and put on a show.
Yeah.
Really, like, especially with Pegu Club shutting and a few like really high-end places that have made the press shutting during COVID, like places with huge brand equity and massive fellowship have been broken by these shutdowns, and it sort of shows that
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how much big your brand is, how much long you've been open for, we still can get crippled by something like this. How has it
Yeah.
changed everything for you?
Well, I mean, it's changed everything. And you know, not in a million years did I ever see this coming, which is so strange. You know, I'm just like, how did I not? I don't know. I never thought that something like this would actually happen, even though, you know, people have talked about it. But, you know, it has, you know, it's every 2 weeks, it's like we're opening a new bar, you know. I feel very fortunate, again, that we are in a neighborhood. I know there are a lot of bars that are incredible places that just happen to be located in areas where they depend on people who work there.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the spots in Manhattan, you know, I mean, I look at, you know, the Dead Rabbit, for example. Those guys are in Lower Manhattan. Not very, you know, there are some people who live down there, but like a lot of their clientele were people who work there, and
Yeah.
none of those people are going to work. And the same thing for bars in like Times Square. You know, I mean, Manhattan, I think in a lot of ways is harder hit than, you know, we are. So again, we're in the neighborhood. We have people who are working from home in the neighborhood. So there are certainly those people that are out. You know, right now we're just we're doing about 50% of our normal business at both bars, and we're just trying to sort of make it. It's like the long game of how can we make it. And you know, my sort of pivot has been, again, the side hustle.
Yeah.
Because I was like, you know, when this all started, I was like, we're not gonna, you know, my wife and I both have opened all of the bars, and she's at Clover Club in Leanda every day, and we're not diversified at all. All of our income comes from the bars.
Mm-hmm.
And so when this happened, we were just like, oh shit. Yeah, so I started, now I'm a brand ambassador for Kopali Rum, and that was one of the last meetings. I actually was going to sign on with them even before COVID happened, but that was something I was like, well, I'm glad I was already talking to those guys. And then we were launching Social Hour. I've been teaching Zoom cocktail classes to corporate people who are stuck at home and want to learn how to make drinks. So I'm sending them my book and cocktail ingredients. And, I've been doing all these things just to try to keep our family afloat so that I don't need money from the bars.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think everybody's experience is different. It's been very frustrating in New York. Having to police the public as bar owners, and my staff having to police the public is crazy. Thankfully, I know a lot of bar owners in other states that have it a lot worse, because Brooklyn is certainly, they don't call it the Brooklyn bubble for nothing. It's a lot of liberal people who are following the rules and are very respectful of and also thankful that we're there for them.
Do you think Social Hour, Social Hour it's never a really great time to launch a brand new product, but do you think launching canned cocktails during a pandemic may have actually been a good thing? Because of
I wish that, we've been working on this project for years. Part of me is kicking myself for not making Tom Macy finish sooner with, we're such perfectionists, in the same way that we create cocktails for a menu and do 25 different versions of the drink before it actually goes on the menu. We did the same thing with the cans that we were, the gin and tonic and the whiskey mule and the Pacific Spritz. And we were like, oh, a little bit more bitter. Let's lower the ABV. Let's raise the ABV. And we were messing around with our stuff because our names are on it. I was like, I'm not putting my name on something that isn't great, So it took us a long time to actually get to that point. And then we were supposed to launch in April. I don't know that it's certainly not, I don't think it's better to launch during a pandemic, but there's definitely growth in that market and people are excited. We've had really awesome feedback and a lot of local liquor stores picking us up, and we're, looking to grow the brand, and we're excited about it. But it's been challenging because you can't, it's like you walk into a liquor store and you're like, hi, I'm Julie Reiner and I want to show you my cans,
I have a little side hustle myself. I have a distribution agency doing craft spirits here in the province, and liquor stores don't even want to see you, mask or otherwise. No. They don't, no drop-ins, no nothing. We'll call you if we need you. Yeah. Because the next 6 months is up in the air. I usually ask what's happening for the next 6 months, but I think the next 6 months is up in the air for everybody. Yeah. But before I let you go, because I know that your time is precious, what is the one piece of advice you'd give to a young bartender who, especially during COVID, is sort of questioning whether or not to stay in the hospitality industry or not, or to sort of push forward and double down on what they love, especially if it's a passion over just a job to make some side money? What's the one piece of advice? Because I know you do world class and you're a legendary mentor for hundreds of bartenders. What's the one piece of advice?
Well, I have to believe that this is not going to last forever. We are going to get to a point where people can be together again. People will sit at my bars again, and you will be able to serve them, And so if this is your passion, don't give it up because we're in a really tough spot right now. I think looking back, we'll be like, holy shit, 2020 and 2021, those were rough years. But, in the grand scheme of things, I think that, we're going to get to a point where we get back to doing what we were doing and taking care of people. And, we facilitate a good time for a lot of, and an escape for people and somebody to talk to. And, if this is your true passion, you too have to figure out how you're going to get to the other side of this. and obviously support yourself. But, don't jump ship too fast.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time, Julie. It was an absolute pleasure. I'm glad that I wasn't so nervous that I freaked out this morning, but it was.
I think I freaked out when I realized that I was like 9:00. It's time for you.
I still, regardless of what I'm doing in the industry, the books and everything like that, I fanboyed out the other week when I talked to Angus, and Angus and I have known each other for like 20 years, but I still fanboy out because I'm still that 26-year-old Australian bartender who moved to North America. On a whim.
I love it.
So
cool. Well, this has been great talking to you, and congrats on all of your stuff that you have going on, and I'll keep watching and see what you're up to, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you very much. I'll see you real soon, okay?
All right, Shawn. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.